I have a pleasure to present next speaker of this section is our colleague, Father Professor Piotr Pasterczyk, professor of philosophy, doctor of theology. He studied on Academy of Philosophy in Liechtenstein, in Albert Ludwig's Universität in Freiburg, where he finished his doctorate thesis. His research area is antique philosophy, Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, phenomenology and hermeneutics, anthropology of religion. He also created the John Paul II philosophical studies in our University of Lublin, the Catholic University of Lublin. Is very interesting study about philosophical thing of Wojtyła. He was a professor of ethics in our faculty. Father Professor Piotr Pasterczyk is also chief editor of the Journal of Cultural Studies and member of the Pontifical Council for Culture. Oh, please. The title of his presentation is Pythagorean sources of classical and I think medieval as aesthetic in the light of Martin Heidegger's understanding of a work of art. Please, Piotr.
Okay, thank you for invitation. Can you confirm you can hear my voice?
Yes. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I don't have a nice presentation, nice photos, but I would try to transform by my voice some interesting interpretations of classical aesthetics in light of Martin Heidegger's hermeneutics. I will begin with a short description of Pythagorean thinking, mathematics and beauty on Pythagorean thought. The philosophical origins of classical aesthetics derive from Pythagorean thought, which was followed by the metaphysical reflection of Plato, Aristotle, and in the late antiquity, the thought of St. Augustine of Hippo. The Pythagoreans tried to understand being in relation to its mathematical principle, which had a decisive influence on their understanding of beauty as harmony. As Aristotle notes in his Metaphysics, in numbers, the Pythagoreans found the properties and relations of harmony, and everything else seemed to them a reflection of number. Therefore, they had elements of numbers for the elements of all being, and in all heaven they saw harmony and number. Pythagoreans realized that mathematical principles governed the world of sound, because the harmonious and disharmonious sound of strings could be correlated with their lengths corresponding to simple number relations. They related acoustic harmony to mathematical relations such as measure and proportion, becoming the source of one of the most important aesthetic canons in Western culture. Pythagorean sources of ancient aesthetics do not explicitly define beauty and its principle, but speak of harmony as the principle of the world. This understanding of harmony became decisive for the understanding of beauty within the later tradition of Greek metaphysics. It is not difficult to explain because the harmony of sounds causes a certain aesthetic reaction, which gives rise to what we can call the experience of beauty. For the Pythagoreans, beauty is associated with proportion and measure, but the term harmony itself means something more. The Greek term harmonia can be translated as juxtaposition, union, or unity in multiplicity, in which we find the central idea of Greek metaphysics present in the writings of Heraclitus, Parmenides, Plato, and Aristotle. This means that, as its Pythagorean source, the concept of beauty and aesthetics carries the most important term of Greek metaphysics, which is the notion of the relationship between unity and multiplicity, and a unification of diversity and multiplicity in some form of unity. For the Pythagoreans themselves, harmony was something that, according to the Polish philosopher of aesthetics, Tatarkiewicz, we can relate to the objectivity of the thing itself, on the one hand, because symmetry, proportion, and order are properties of the thing, and on the other hand, to the quantitative aspect of the thing, because proportion is an arrangement of many elements which reflects its mathematical nature. The second aspect speaks not only of the harmony of a being, of a thing, as a one thing, but the harmony of the world as a collection of all existing things. The Pythagorean called this kind of harmony cosmos, or order, which is the whole world. Etymologically, this type of harmony is related in Greek to the term beauty, which emphasized the metaphysical understanding of beauty as a transcendental property of being. We can find Pythagorean cosmos in the mathematical and astronomical discourses of Plato in Timaeus and Aristotle in his Physics and De Cello, which only partially direct the attention to the aesthetic aspect while remaining focused on the astronomical and metaphysical question. We can see the aesthetic aspect in the description of the cosmos found in Plato's Republic, where the structure of the world depicted within the myth of the posthumous journey of the soldier air is a harmony of light and sound. The entire cosmos in harmoniously moving structure of rings moving at different speeds and generating different colors and sounds. And now a short citation from Republic. There at the top on each ring walks a siren rotating with it and produces one voice and one tone. All of them together, and there are 8 of them, form one chord. End of citation. As we can see in this description, we have the structure of the musical octave that builds the whole range that is the basis of European music. In addition, this musical harmony of the cosmos in interspersed with the harmony of colors, creating what we could today describe as an aesthetically pleasing audiovisual spectacle. However, the cosmos, in the sense of a physical and therefore acoustic and visual structure, is not the only manifestation of beauty in the thought initiated by the Pythagoreans and continued by Plato and Aristotle. Indeed, an example of harmony can also be the human soul, which appears in Greek thought in Pythagorean sources and is later defined as the source of life by Aristotle, or the model of divine human existence by Plato. The harmony of the soul is the harmony of the microcosm, which in Greek metaphysics, since Plato, has been understood as multi-part structure. Like a musical range or light spectrum, the structure of the soul is a kind of harmony, in which the multiplicity of elements finds its unity in the structure itself, which is a model of the unity later referred to by Aristotle as substance, hypokeimenon. The unity of the soul as the totality of its 3 parts was defined by Plato Socrates in Republic as justice, or doing one sound thing by thinking, anger, and desire. The harmony of justice has an aesthetic dimension because it can express the beauty of the human soul. But it also has an ethical dimension because beauty in the language of Plato is identified with goodness, kalokragatia. Consequently, we see the development of the basic metaphysical concepts in Plato, which are the concepts of beauty and goodness, which interchangeably manifest unity and multiplicity as terms of being. This unity emanates in multiplicity with order, which we will refer to as beauty or goodness depending on the situation. You can also see the harmony of the soul in the Pythagorean belief in the musical purification of the soul as part of the Orphic mystery. This idea, of which Friedrich Nietzsche's intuition about the musical source of Greek tragedy may be a late illustration, presupposes in the Pythagoreans a mysterious and musical catharsis of the human soul immersed in the body as in prison. Aristotle's disciple and ancient music expert Aristoxenos writes of this purification. The Pythagoreans used medicine to purify bodies and music to purify souls. I go to the second point. This is the point about understanding of aesthetics in thinking of St. Augustine of Hippo. St. Augustine was an heir to ancient Greek thought, and this means that his understanding of beauty depends on the Pythagorean reference to mathematical harmony as a source of aesthetic experience. St. Augustine undoubtedly assumes that beauty is a property both of things themselves and of the cosmos as a collection of all existent things. However, unlike his ancient predecessors, the Bishop of Hippo is not only convinced of the objective nature of beauty, but as a Christian, he also provides a theological explanation of it. In the Vera Religione, Augustine answers the question of the source of beauty by asserting that something is pleasing because it is beautiful and not the other way around. Things have an objective source of beauty in themselves because they are created by God, and the creative act is both an act of willing and pleasing, which in the Middle Ages would give rise to a metaphysical belief in the transcendent properties of things, which include not only their unity and being, but also their goodness and beauty. In defining beauty, St. Augustine repeats the Pythagorean view, suggesting the existence of harmony based on number, which is the source of musical and visual experience. In the Libero Arbitrio, the Bishop of Hippo writes that number is created by God and as such becomes the source of everything that has sensually perceived dimensions and shapes within it. Implicit in number is, on the one hand, the structure of a thing, and on the other hand, its beauty, which can be read by artists who create works of art. For Augustine, harmony is thus a matter of proportion, or the ratio of the whole to its parts. This whole is the cosmos, which in the thought of the Bishop of Hippo is the mundus created by God, and if even a part of it does not evoke the experience of beauty in isolation from other parts, it becomes beautiful when considered in the context of the cosmic whole. By asserting that a form of all beauty is unity, St. Augustine confirms the dialectical intuition of Plato, who in dialogues such as Parmenides, Sophist, and Philebus, speculates on the relation of unity to multiplicity, confirming one of the most important problems of Western metaphysics. It is worth noting that a simple consequence of this problem, precisely the understanding of beauty involving the interpretation of the ratio of unity to multiplicity in the context of the Pythagorean discovery of musical and visual harmony. According to Augustine, numerical proportions are the source of the arousal of the visual and auditory experience of beauty, the consequence of which is the belief that the object of beauty is uncut in the body because it consists in the proportional arrangement of its parts and the pleasure in the perception of visual and acoustic phenomena. The Augustinian belief in the numerical proportion, however, goes beyond the scope of pure mathematical harmony described by the Pythagoreans, because it sees the source of beauty not only in pure mathematical harmony, but also in proper numerical proportion. Tatarkiewicz draws attention to this by suggesting that the Bishop of Hippo could not decide whether the source of beauty is purely mathematical proportion, as in music, or the qualitative ratio of the parts to the whole. The split probably has two causes, because on the one hand, we can find such an opinion already in the writing of Cicero, from which the Bishop of Hippo drew profusely, and on the other hand, such an opinion can also be considered a logical consequence of the Christian faith, finding a priori, goodness and beauty not only in aesthetics, but also in the moral terms. Thus, beauty is a consequence of a certain proportion. It is a consequence of the structure of the world created by God, which is the natural basis for human moral behavior. In describing proportion, proper, and in describing beauty, in its relation, for example, to pleasure as a physical experience of beauty, St. Augustine encounters the difficulty of expressing the difference between beauty as a consequence of measure, proportion, and number, and beauty that we can define as inner beauty or spiritual beauty. In his philosophical writings, written before his conversion, Augustine refers to beauty primarily within the Hellenistic aesthetic tradition, while in the Confessiones he admits an error of loving inferior beauty, which consequently became for him a path into the abyss. It is true that all the time he calls what is pleasant beautiful, but it is clear that in his thought there is a divergence in capturing beauty as good, because what is morally ugly and leads to disaster is certainly not something good, consequently also beautiful in the classical Platonic sense. The divergence between Pythagorean Platonic aesthetics and the Augustinian aesthetics is also revealed in the distinction between what is beautiful and what can be defined as appropriate, aptum, decorum, or pleasing. Appropriateness is characterized not by beauty as such, but by the phenomenon of liking something corporeal, which is fitted in an appropriate way, like, for example, a shoe, to a leg. In contrast, what is pleasing, suave, Augustine referred to sounds, distinguishing them from beauty in the sense of visual sensations. This was probably because visual experience can be quickly reduced to the experience of proportion and numerical harmony, while what is audible is experienced on a more immediate and sensual level. Tatarkiewicz is of the opinion that St. Augustine's aesthetics went beyond ancient aesthetics in a psychological context, because it distinguished between a mental factor and sensual factor in aesthetic experience, which the Polish philosopher relates to the concept of visiones, as vivid and expressive image evoked by poets and speakers. The author of Confessiones is limited by the Pythagorean Platonic canon of perceiving beauty exclusively within the framework of the relationship between unity and multiplicity, and seems to have no philosophical idea himself to describe beauty in light of its metaphysical source as a source of mathematical proportion or the source of number and unity itself. This is not a reproach, of course, because on this point Augustine reaches the limit of the Western metaphysical paradigm, which is Plato's pointing to one in itself and indefinite duality as the ultimate sources of both number and being. St. Augustine is thus left with religious metaphors, which are not lacking in the biblical account of the Greek books of the Old Testament. For example, citation, God arranged everything according to measure and number and weight. And now I will come to Martin Heidegger, because my description of the classical aesthetics and partially medieval aesthetics in the thought of St. Augustine change enormously in the modern time, especially in the thinking of Martin Heidegger. The modern and postmodern understanding of beauty contrasts with the Pythagorean notion of harmony and the metaphysical interpretation of unity and multiplicity. What is most striking about Martin Heidegger's thought is the change in perspective from scientific realism to phenomenological hermeneutics. The terms science and hermeneutics are conventionally signal a difference which can be defined in terms of looking at the world from the point of view of the rules present in it that are independent of the human mind, or from the point of view of the rules present in the human mind. An example of the first perspective is Aristotle's metaphysics, while the foundation of the second perspective is laid in Kant's Critic der reinen Vernunft. Martin Heidegger does not, of course, repeat the Kantian position, but in some sense, he's the heir of and the central concept of his hermeneutical phenomenology in the Weltsein. Situates the world not in the perspective of scientific rules, but in the perspective of human existence, which in Being and Time is given the term Dasein. Unlike ancient intuition, for Heidegger, the world is not something that can be described in terms of mathematical rules, and that can appear in its beauty as a harmony of sound and color. This metaphysical world appears to man as a structure in motion that can be described using the language of science, understood specifically in relation to mathematical paradigms such Euclid geometry or Eudoxus theory of proportion and astronomy. In a fundamental ontological perspective, this is the Heideggerian perspective, on the other hand, the world appears as an existential structure that can be described using hermeneutic tools. The Heideggerian world is the world at its source. That means at the moment of its original formation, at the interface of human existence and its each-time environment. Thus, for Heidegger, human existence is by no means a microcosm or a structure of elements that can constitute the harmony of the good and the beautiful, but Dasein, that is an element of the world in the sense of the hermeneutic structure in the Weltsein. And now I would tell something about Heidegger's critique of the metaphysical model of aesthetics. Beauty and goodness cannot therefore be the subject of hermeneutical and phenomenological thought in the same sense as they are a metaphysical problem. Among the great interpretive questions of Being and Time is whether the work contains any form of ethics at all as a perspective on the systematic distinction between good and evil, or aesthetics as a distinction between beauty and ugliness. Heidegger's interpreters generally answer this question in the negative, pointing out that the Heideggerian project itself is based on the destruction of metaphysics, and thus the rejection of a paradigm of classical ethics and aesthetics based on the concept of harmony. The only indication of some form of normativity in being and time can be found in the concepts of Eigentlichkeit and Uneigentlichkeit, which can be understood as terms for the mode of human existence as right or wrong existence. However, Eigentlichkeit can in no way be equated with moral goodness or beauty, just as Uneigentlichkeit is not an expression of moral evil or ugliness. For Heidegger, these are two equally primary modes of human existence. Heidegger writes in Being and Time, as modes of being, authenticity, it is English translation for Eigentlichkeit, and inauthenticity are both grounded in the fact that any Dasein whatsoever is characterized by minor-ness. But inauthenticity of Dasein does not signify any less being or any lower degree of being. Rather, it is the case that even in its fullest concretion, Dasein can be characterized by inauthenticity when busy, when excited, when interested, when ready for enjoyment. End of citation. The problem of beauty is much better grasped by Martin Heidegger in a later phase of his thought, namely in his essay Der Ursprung des Kunstwerkes, written in 1935. The turn from fundamental ontology to the paradigm of the being historicity, Seinsgeschichte, is marked in Heidegger's work, among other things, by his choice of topics related to language, to art and poetry, which became for him an alternative to metaphysics and science as a form of speaking about reality. For Heidegger, art became a space within which a thoughtful and philosophical confrontation could take place with an approach to the world that he had previously described as metaphysical and later as scientific or technical. Technique, in which the problem of being manifests itself, according to Heidegger, receives a counterbalance in the form of art, which makes it possible to understand the essence of technique as technique. This confrontation with technique takes place in an area that, on the one hand, is related to technique, because art and technique enable men to access the truth as a dynamic process, consisting of the unveiling of the being. In this process is accomplished what in the Greek term for truth, as aletheia, consists in the discovery of what is, which by Heidegger is defined after as the uncovering or unveiling of being, Unverborgenheit in German. A work of art is a form of unveiling of being, because in a work of art, what comes out into the space of its unveiling. On the other hand, art builds a certain area that is opposed to technique and allows a contrasting approach to the essence of technique, which is an intense form of forgetting being. Similarly, as was said earlier regarding the two modes of being, Eigentlichkeit und Uneigentlichkeit, both art and technique reveal being in an equally primordial and pertinent way. The difference between these two modes is that art opens up a space in which a new relationship of man to the world and to himself can be built, while the technique reproduces man's relationship to the world of trying to master and dominate the world. In der Ursprung des Kunstwerkes, Heidegger identifies the hylomorphic distinction between matter and form with a conceptual scheme of all aesthetics and art theory. He means the classical art theory. This suggestion coincides with what was said above regarding the connection between the Pythagorean opinion pointing to the mathematical source of harmony and its metaphysical interpretation in the writings of Plato and Aristotle. Aristotle's hylomorphism is a quintessential to Western metaphysics and should be interpreted in light of its Pythagorean and Platonic sources, that is, in light of the concept of unity and multiplicity. The Pythagorean understanding of number as a source of being is interpreted in Platonic dialectics in light of the concept of unity and indefinite duality. These two concepts are related in Aristotle's metaphysics to the two sources of being, form and as a source of being's unity, and matter as a source of its multiplicity. In Western aesthetics, from as early as the Pythagoreans, is built on the theory of harmony, interpreting beauty as the effect of unity in multiplicity. And Aristotle's hylomorphism is a major form of this approach to reality, which gains over time the name Philosophia Perennis. This becomes so because of the medieval reception of Aristotle by Thomas Aquinas, who transmit hylomorphism not only to the entire Middle Ages, but also to the modern era. However, pointing to the relation between aesthetics and metaphysics, Heidegger interprets not so much historical philosophical dependencies, but puts forward a systematic thesis. The hylomorphic distinction between matter and form has neither sufficient justification in itself, nor does it belong to the domain of the work of art at all, and probably is not to explain its essence. What is new about the understanding of art and beauty that Heidegger records in the Ursprung des Kunstwerkes? This new is firstly the criticism of the work of art as something that in a material way is in the front of man in the sense as it is described, for example, by the perspective of Euclidean geometry, which determines the reality of space within a certain theoretical model. Secondly, it is an opinion indicating that it is not harmony that determines that a work of art is a work of art, but experience of truth. A work of art, unlike a work of technology, truly reveals what is. This unveiling of being is in Heidegger's language the designation of truth, and a work of art is a place where one experiences truth. Euclidean geometry can be related to reality in the sense of the physical world by designating its dimensions and reducing it to a certain space in which it becomes visible through these dimensions. The two- or three-dimensional world becomes the location of all things and processes, and the essence of this location is, as in Pythagorean thought, number. For Heidegger, this world is not the real world, but only a world built on the basis of a certain scientific or theoretical model. The real world lies deeper than Euclid's theoretical model, which is only one of many possible hypothetical models. As the history of science shows, this variant has been replaced by other mathematical or physical models. Already in his fundamental ontological understanding of the world and man, Heidegger strongly criticized such an understanding of reality by contrasting it with the hermeneutic phenomenological understanding of things as belonging to the human world without relating it only to the dimension of being, a metaphysical thing in itself, whose place is determined by the metaphysical model of things as material form reality. It is not matter and form that constitute the ultimate and primary source of things, because like Euclidean geometry, Platonic and Aristotelian metaphysical paradigm delineate a thing by some scheme in which that thing cannot be seen in its ultimate primordiality. This primordiality begins to become apparent when we relate the thing to its source in being perceived by man, a human being, and thus in being unveiled in the internal movement of its truth, in the Greek sense aletheia. A work of art is something incomprehensible if it is referred only to the theoretical model of plane and space, or space within science, or to the hylomorphic model within metaphysics. Thus, beauty referred by the Pythagoreans to the harmony of unity in multiplicity is not for Heidegger something decisive for the constitution of the work of art as such. Instead, something constitutive for him is the possibility of extracting being from his unconcealability. Thank you for your attention.